Tonight on 24, we bring you major developments as southern Iran reels under heavy blows from intense airstrikes, with U.S. attacks expanding to target at least 35 strategic locations. Amidst the escalating violence, Speaker Ghalibaf declared that Tehran sees absolutely no reason to stick to the nuclear agreement. This has deepened the diplomatic deadlock in the region, drawing sharp and continued condemnation of the Islamic Republic's actions by the UAE and the Gulf Cooperation Council. In response, Arachiki has headed to Doha. Concurrently, the U.S. announced new sanctions against individuals and entities linked to supplying weapons to the regime, while U.S. forces blocked 2 Iranian merchant ships from continuing their route amid an ongoing naval blockade. Broadcasting live from the Iran International Studio, this is 24 with Fardad Farahzad. A very warm welcome and a good day to our viewers tuning in from within Iran and across the globe. Just an hour ago, Mohammad Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, declared that while the Islamic Republic does not welcome war, the nation must remain constantly prepared for battle. He emphasized that alongside military readiness, active diplomacy and negotiation are essential tools to secure Iran's national interests. However, Ghalibaf also highlighted an eye-for-an-eye policy, warning that Tehran sees no reason to stick to existing agreements if reciprocal actions are not met. CENTCOM announced that the latest wave of U.S. attacks targeted coastal defense systems and a missile depot on Greater Tumb Island. During a 7-hour operation last night, the U.S. military also struck multiple targets, including 2 military barracks in Sistan and Baluchistan. Since this new round of attacks began last week, at least 35 locations in Iran have been hit. Meanwhile, NBC News reports that the final cost of the war could reach $100 billion. My colleague Marzia Husseini joins us from the U.S. Congress. Marzia, now the Iranian side is also saying there's no reason to stick to the memorandum. This is while the fire, battle, and conflict between Iran and the U.S. just keep escalating.
That's right, Fardad. We're witnessing the 5th day of the new round of U.S. attacks on Iran. Trump says that in just the last 3 days, we've targeted 140 targets inside Iran. We know the last round of attacks on Wednesday was 90 minutes of intense strikes that we know targeted Greater Tumb. As for the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, according to the latest reports, only 21 ships have passed through, which is far less than the 130 ships that were recorded before these tensions restarted in the region. But what is generally being discussed here in Washington today is the option of whether Mr. Donald Trump is getting ready for a ground invasion of the Islamic Republic. Given all the movements we saw yesterday, the interview Trump did with Fox News, the meeting held in the Situation Room, the New York Times says all of this is actually like evidence, supporting evidence. It's that all the attacks Trump has carried out so far, meaning the entire past 4 months, should be considered one phase. And now here is a turning point where we are entering the second phase of attacks. And this option of a ground invasion is considered highly likely. CNN says these attacks will probably be attacks that will be on Kharg Island. After Trump didn't rule out the possibility of a ground invasion of Iran in his interview with Fox News, he said, "Let me tell you what the plan is. The plan is that we will greatly increase the intensity of the attacks over the next 3 days, and next week we'll go after the bridges. We'll go after energy facilities if the Islamic Republic doesn't come to the negotiating table." Now, what the media and actually military experts here in Washington are doing is they are actually conducting a feasibility study on whether the U.S. can really launch a ground invasion if it wants to. If we remember, it was first last May that the Washington Post published a report quoting White House officials, saying Trump is very interested in a ground invasion, at least of Kharg Island. At that time, it was said that because of the high cost, the high political cost it had, Trump backed off. And now they also say that over the past 2 months, they took this option off the table because of the memorandum. And now this option is now back on the White House table. They are considering it. Al Jazeera says it's probably not just Kharg Island either. Islands like Hormuz and Hangam could probably also be U.S. targets. A feasibility study says attacks are technically possible, pointing to the regional presence of at least 50,000 U.S. troops and 20 warships, including 2 aircraft carriers. Any such operations must be sea-to-land and air-to-land attacks. Who can do this? They say the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit of the U.S. Marines has 2,000 people trained for this. They can do both operations at the same time, and it's said they are also stationed on a ship called the Boxer. Alongside this, we also know the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division has been an option we've talked about many times. All of these are ready in the region if Trump wants to make such a decision. It's technically and logistically possible. But politically, they say Trump really has to weigh this carefully, because considering that if he wants to carry out such attacks only on the Islamic Republic's islands without destroying the Islamic Republic's air defense, this means a very high casualty rate. Unless Trump wants to expand these attacks and specifically capture the southern regions of Iran. But we know, based on Axios's report, the meeting that took place yesterday in the Situation Room specifically addressed this very issue. And let me return here to the U.S. Congress, where yesterday Democrats didn't approve the Pentagon's budget. But as for why they did this, let's hear it from themselves, from the Democratic senator from Arizona.
This is nonsense because the war with Iran has been going on this whole time. Trump is trying to bypass the War Powers Resolution. We have been at war this whole time, and determining whether a war is ongoing is up to Congress, not a president who is offering an arbitrary definition of war. I think we in the United States have always valued our role as protectors of maritime security. I don't know how imposing another naval blockade can create conditions that bring us more security or get us to a point where we can say the war will end.
Fardad, this budget is specifically a budget that, because of the attacks on Iran, was specifically not approved by the Democrats. This budget is a budget that in past years, because it's the budget for U.S. soldiers' salaries, has always been approved with strong bipartisan support. But now, because of the Iran issue and the political differences that exist, it's severely causing problems for the Pentagon. Democratic senators are saying they can't just bring such a budget and put it on our table as if nothing is happening in the Middle East. Senator Chuck Schumer definitely said. He said, if we approve this budget, it's as if we've authorized war. That's why they're not willing to approve such a budget. And this issue has caused very widespread criticism from Democrats against Trump, while we know U.S. media reports indicate that the cost of the war is much higher than what the Pentagon has talked about, at least $100 billion so far.
Thank you, Marzieh Hosseini from the U.S. Congress. Just minutes ago, U.S. President Donald Trump, regarding conflicts with Iran, said he is not interested in setting a deadline. The president emphasized that Tehran must behave properly. But as tensions continue in the region and Iran's attacks in the Persian Gulf persist, Abbas Araghchi went to Doha to attend the memorial service for the former emir of Qatar. At the same time, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, visited the Qatari embassy in Tehran and met with diplomats. This comes as Politico reports a deadlock in the mediation efforts of Qatar and Pakistan to resume talks between Tehran and Washington. Ruhollah Rahimpour, journalist and political analyst, and Aram Hessami, political science professor at Montgomery College in Maryland, join us. Mr. Rahimpour, although the conflict has escalated significantly between Iran and the U.S., reading between the lines when we listen to the words of both Ghalibaf and the U.S. president, it doesn't seem like a meaningful strategic shift is on the horizon. It seems they still hope these strikes will eventually lead to a negotiation and an agreement.
Greetings to you, Mr. Farahzad, dear Mr. Hessami, and also the respected viewers. Maybe we shouldn't emphasize strategic shift too much, or consider it a very accurate term. But the issue of the strategic horizon is a very important topic here, because that ultimate goal that the United States is pursuing, which is actually to prevent any access by the Islamic Republic to nuclear weapons, and for now their strategy is one of negotiation and diplomacy, goes through resolving the issue of the Strait of Hormuz in southern Iran. Consequently, until this fundamental issue is fully resolved, virtually no realistic possibility will exist for diplomatic negotiations to even commence, let alone progress toward a comprehensive and final agreement. At the heart of this diplomatic stalemate lies a deeply entrenched and highly volatile conflict between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States over the strategic Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical maritime transit checkpoints for global energy supplies. On one side, the Islamic Republic seeks to exploit its control and influence over this vital waterway waterway, utilizing it as a powerful geopolitical lever to significantly bolster its overall bargaining position. Conversely, the United States is actively working to counter this strategy. Washington aims to prevent the strait from being weaponized as diplomatic leverage, thereby diminishing Iran's negotiating power and forcing them to enter talks from a weaker position. These current clashes, meaning the 6 rounds of clashes that have taken place during the so-called ceasefire or pause in the war, have been mainly focused on this very issue. So, this has caused the Memorandum of Understanding to be suspended for now and the negotiations to be at a standstill. So, for now, there is no change in strategy, but there is a strategic horizon, and that is that the issue of the Strait of Hormuz must be resolved in favor of one of the parties.
Mr. Hissami, do you believe we are witnessing a fundamental shift in U.S. foreign policy toward the Islamic Republic, perhaps even aiming for outright regime change? At this point, the U.S. president has avoided publicly endorsing such an extreme outcome. Instead, it appears the administration is strategically delivering targeted, coercive blows to the Iranian regime in a calculated effort to weaken their leverage and pressure them back to the negotiating table for a new agreement. I think your audio is cut off, Mr. Hissami. If you could turn on your microphone.
Yes, that is exactly how I view it. Just like you just mentioned, that memorandum of understanding was the crucial instrument that effectively led to a state of détente and reconciliation, ushering in a completely fresh, highly constructive diplomatic approach towards the Republic.
Well, it unfortunately seems that our live satellite connection with Mr. Hissami and Mr. Rahimpour has been temporarily disrupted. If we can resolve these technical issues, we will certainly return to the gentleman later in the broadcast. But for now, we have spectacular live images coming in from Buenos Aires in Argentina, showcasing the massive gathering of Argentina's passionate national team fans. There is less than half an hour, about 20 minutes left, until this monumental game begins. As you know, in a few minutes, Argentina will face off against England in the highly anticipated World Cup semifinals. The ultimate winner of this match will head straight to the final and face Spain's formidable national team on Sunday in New York. We will also have live images from London in a few moments to see the excited England fans if my colleagues broadcast that feed. Right, here in London, excited fans of the England team are gearing up as kickoff against Argentina is just 18 minutes away. The stakes are incredibly high, because tonight's winner will advance to face Spain in the grand finals. Well, I think our connection with Mr. Hissami and Mr. Rahimpour has been reestablished. I apologize to both you and the gentleman for the poor connection quality. Mr. Hissami, I'll continue with you. Well, it seems we don't have Mr. Hissami. We only have Mr. Rahimpour. Mr. Rahimpour, how much do you think this exchange of fire could lead to a change of stance by either side? Because it seems that both, I won't say they have a very strong hand, but they aren't empty-handed either. Both the U.S. naturally has a far superior military capability and can target pretty much any position it wants across Iran. And Iran, after all, has found this tool of the Strait of Hormuz and can make this waterway insecure at any moment it wishes, even with fewer and weaker military forces. Well, it seems that our audio connection is still disrupted. Apparently, Mr. Rahimpour cannot hear my voice. I apologize to him and to you. Well, while our production crew works diligently behind the scenes to resolve this unexpected technical crisis with our broadcast feed, Let us take this opportunity to head back and check in on the passionate supporters of both the Argentina and England national teams. Right now, you can clearly see the sea of enthusiastic Argentine fans, proudly sporting those iconic, internationally recognized blue and white striped jerseys, anxiously counting down the mere 15 minutes remaining until kickoff. There is no doubt that this highly anticipated clash will be an absolutely breathtaking, intense competition for spectators worldwide. Whichever side emerges victorious today will earn the prestigious honor of facing Spain in the grand final, after Spain secured their own spot in a similarly dramatic, thrilling semifinal match. We are currently bringing you these spectacular live images directly from the heart of Buenos Aires, where the ecstatic support. With tensions escalating in the Strait of Hormuz, the average price of gasoline at Canadian gas stations has gone up by about 3.5 cents per liter compared to last week. Analysts predict that in the coming days, the price of gasoline in this country will increase by another 5 to 10 cents per liter. In addition to the war in the Middle East, Ukraine's drone attacks on Russian oil refineries have been cited as factors in the rising gasoline prices. More details from Masa Mortazavi.
The ongoing global energy crisis, triggered by the sudden closure of the strategic Strait of Hormuz and exacerbated by escalating geopolitical conflicts between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States, has sent severe shockwaves through international oil markets. As a direct result, gasoline prices continue their steep upward trajectory worldwide, and Canada has certainly not been spared from this severe economic strain. Here in Canada, motorists are bracing for immediate impact, with gasoline prices projected to jump by as much as 7 cents per liter tonight. This sharp increase means that fuel prices have reached their highest average level since the peace agreement was signed last month, completely erasing the brief period of stability that Canadian consumers had hoped would last. The situation is particularly dire in eastern Canada. Provinces such as Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, which rely heavily on refined gasoline imported directly from Europe, are facing unprecedented price hikes that are breaking historic records. While British Columbia has traditionally been Canada's most expensive province for fuel, Nova Scotia and Newfoundland have now surprisingly surpassed it due to these severe import vulnerabilities and logistical challenges. The rapid price adjustments at Canadian pumps reflect a preemptive pricing strategy. Today's retail price is determined by what is known as the replacement cost, meaning the price retailers must pay to replenish their underground supply tomorrow, rather than what they originally paid for it. With experts predicting prolonged tensions and supply disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, fuel distributors are raising prices now to protect their margins and ensure they can afford to purchase replacement shipments in a volatile market. To mitigate this heavy financial burden on citizens, the Canadian government, which previously took the step of removing the carbon tax on gasoline, may now be forced to evaluate the removal of other federal and provincial fuel taxes to provide some relief.
Researchers at Sweden's prestigious Karolinska Institute have warned in a new article that the recent conflict, beyond its military, political, and humanitarian consequences, has severely affected the mental health of Iranians living abroad. According to them, constant worry about family and relatives back in Iran, following the relentless news cycle moment by moment, and viewing distressing war images can significantly exacerbate anxiety, chronic stress, and other psychological trauma among the Iranian immigrant diaspora. My colleague Mehran Abbasian has more details in this report.
Karolinska is one of the most prestigious medical and research centers in the world, located in Sweden, a center that selects the winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine every year. Now, a number of researchers from this institute, along with researchers from several other countries, have warned in an article that the war between the Islamic Republic, Israel, and the U.S. doesn't just affect the mental health of people inside the conflict zone, but has also affected millions of Iranians abroad. The article states that many Iranians abroad have been constantly following the news since the start of the war, seeing images of the attacks on social media, and worrying about their families and relatives in Iran. According to the researchers, these very conditions can lead to increased anxiety, stress, insomnia, and even symptoms of psychological trauma. The researchers also point to something they call survivor's guilt, meaning people who live in safety themselves, but because their loved ones in Iran face the danger of war, they feel guilty and helpless. In the end, the researchers called on host governments and healthcare systems to take the mental health of immigrant communities, including Iranians, seriously. They should provide counseling and psychotherapy services tailored to their language and culture, and offer more support to those who have been harmed by the psychological consequences of this war. The main message of this article is that the effects of war are not limited to geographical borders, and can affect people's mental health even thousands of kilometers away from the battlefield.
Well, our connection with Rohollah Rahimpour, journalist and political analyst, has been reestablished. Mr. Rahimpour, I apologize. Our connection quality was like the quality of ship traffic tonight in the Strait of Hormuz. I was asking you this: with these continued attacks that Iran is carrying out on commercial ships and the U.S. generally targeting the Islamic Republic's positions in southern Iran, can we see a situation on the horizon where one of the parties is willing to make concessions and return to that memorandum of understanding? Or do you think this is the beginning of a larger conflict?
Right now, what both sides are hoping for is exactly this issue you are raising. They hope that by continuing this situation, meaning that the tension has increased to a significant level, though of course it's being controlled on the brink of an all-out war, it will lead to one of the sides backing down, so to speak. Right now, maybe their wish is for such a thing to happen. It is somewhat unlikely under the current circumstances for such conditions to occur, for such a situation to occur. And that is because of the strategic importance that the issue of the Strait of Hormuz, as I mentioned in the previous section, has created for both sides. On one hand, the Islamic Republic of Iran understands that exerting strategic pressure on the Strait of Hormuz, a vital maritime choke point, allows it to threaten international energy security and destabilize global markets, thereby gaining leverage against the United States. On the other hand, the United States knows that enforcing a strict blockade on the strait, cutting off Iranian economic access, and escalating military strikes will severely cripple the Islamic Republic's economy. This pressure would devastate both military capabilities and civilian livelihoods, triggering a profound domestic crisis and intensifying political pressure on the regime. The fact that today Ghalibaf, in that message he published, does not deny the principle of negotiation, unlike what Khamenei has been saying all this time, neither war nor negotiation. Ghalibaf says that we should fear neither war nor negotiation, is because such a prospect exists in the Islamic Republic. This is the whole picture. But if the Islamic Republic at the current juncture, what I'm saying is raised as an obstacle. If the Islamic Republic at the current juncture retreats from the Strait of Hormuz issue and backs down, it would naturally allow the U.S. to change the situation in its own favor in other matters as well, by applying such pressures. Therefore, the fact that both wish for a change of stance to happen on the other
Thank you, Rohollah Rahimpour, journalist and political analyst, for those insights. Our connection has now been successfully re-established with Aram Hissami, professor of political science at Montgomery College in Maryland. Mr. Hissami, in a way, I posed this question to you earlier. Do you see the United States wanting to change its official stance and return to a policy of regime change in Iran? In Mr. Trump's recent public remarks, we have heard much less of this aggressive stance. Although he once declared that nothing would remain of the Islamic Republic, he did not repeat those extreme words. It seems he primarily aims to alter their overall political stance through targeted military and heavy economic pressure.
Yes, look, that's right. Before the Memorandum of Understanding, they even sort of reviewed and restated the issue of regime change, meaning this happened because some people were killed, some others came to power, meaning they wanted to justify this. But after the Memorandum of Understanding, which was actually supposed to build that trust, it seemed like, in fact, the US or Trump would have a different approach toward the Islamic Republic after these events that happened in the region and the Strait of Hormuz. Therefore, that issue of the Memorandum of Understanding was changing the US approach toward the Islamic Republic. Now, just as you reported, and your reporter also said, the duty of the U.S. Department of Defense and Security Agency is to actually present different scenarios and provide the mechanism for implementing those scenarios. Therefore, the fact that all options are on the table has become more crystallized and tangible than ever. I completely agree with your assessment that initiating regime change is a highly complex and perilous endeavor. The historical precedents of Afghanistan and Iraq, coupled with the ongoing devastation in Syria, clearly demonstrate that toppling a government is far easier than stabilizing a nation afterward. Securing a decisive military victory and successfully managing the subsequent peace are two entirely distinct challenges. Currently, there is a distinct lack of political appetite within the United States to commit the massive resources required for such undertakings, particularly with upcoming elections looming. Furthermore, pursuing a hasty, short-term military intervention under current global conditions would only serve to worsen the situation. It would trigger severe economic instability, driving up costs and compounding existing financial crises, rather than offering any viable long-term solution. Therefore, I see that regime change might be set aside. Eventually, just as the State Department itself, Pompeo and Trump had previously pointed out, they might find reasonable people in the regime that they can get along with. Meaning you destroy one layer, you destroy another layer, you also make their hand a bit stronger with limited attacks on southern Iran, and some other people come to power.
Thank you, Aram Hissami, professor of political science at Montgomery College in Maryland, for being with us. In the past few minutes, the sound of a massive explosion was heard in Erbil, Iraq. News agencies and Iraqi security services are saying that an explosive drone was targeted by air defense in the skies of Erbil, and the sound of the explosion was caused by that. Following the continued Iranian missile and drone attacks on regional countries, the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council accused Tehran of creating chaos, calling the strikes on Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan a dangerous development in regional tensions. Meanwhile, the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs strongly condemned these attacks, which also targeted Qatar's Al Udeid airbase. Ali Sadrzadeh, Middle East analyst, is with us from Frankfurt. Mr. Sadrzadeh, what else do you think needs to happen in these Persian Gulf countries for them to form a military alliance against Iran? Because it seems that for now, their approach is largely one of tolerance. The attacks are quiet, and unless they leak to the media, they don't officially announce them, and they encourage Tehran and Washington to negotiate.
The reality is that this Gulf Cooperation Council has not gone beyond a political council so far, and they have not yet succeeded in forming a military council with a single policy. You practically look at their relations with Israel, what path Bahrain and Qatar are taking, what path Bahrain and the UAE are taking, what path Qatar and Saudi Arabia are taking, what path Kuwait is taking, meaning even in their foreign policy, their diplomatic policy, let alone their military policy, they don't have a unified movement, because after all, this kind of competition exists among them, and their assessments are also different. For instance, regional nations like Qatar and Oman firmly believe, as recently highlighted in an insightful opinion piece published today in Le Monde newspaper by one of their prominent foreign ministers, that peaceful, diplomatic coexistence with the Islamic Republic of Iran is a geopolitical reality we simply must accept. Despite this pragmatic diplomatic approach, all these regional actors resolutely agree on one non-negotiable point: the absolute necessity of maintaining unconditional freedom of passage and maritime navigation through the vital Strait of Hormuz. And since the Islamic Republic has clearly elevated the situation into a vital, existential, and national security priority, we just saw this play out in real time. Only 30 minutes ago, Speaker Ghalibaf gave an important interview where he explicitly stated that Iran's ultimate national security depends on its absolute control over the strategic Strait of Hormuz. He then went on to make it clear that if any potential diplomatic agreement fails to guarantee this control for Tehran, the regime will have absolutely no commitment or adherence to the terms of that agreement going forward. Mr. Bagher Khani, the deputy of the National Security Council, has recently come out and stated that they must retaliate against two separate layers of American statesmen. This targeted retribution is a direct consequence of their specific involvement in ordering and executing the controversial assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in early 2020. And consider when this new round of attacks started. The new round of attacks began even before Mr. Arakchi had returned from Oman when the attacks on Oman started. He had gone there last Saturday, not this Saturday, the Saturday before, to reach a joint solution with Oman, since Oman is, after all, on the southern side of the Strait of Hormuz, so that Oman and Iran could declare, yes, the Strait of Hormuz belongs to us, and this is how we've agreed to manage it. Despite good relations, Oman declared the Strait of Hormuz an international waterway, prompting an immediate attack before Arakchi's plane even returned to Tehran. Qatar faced similar attacks for its clear stance on the strait, joining other nations already being targeted. So, for now, despite Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Arakchi's high-profile diplomatic trip to Doha today, there remains absolutely no tangible sign of any political rapprochement between the key players in the region. Indeed, the era of Qatar seamlessly stepping in to facilitate quiet back-channel diplomacy, the kind of behind-the-scenes mediation they historically specialized in, which routinely culminated in face-to-face negotiations and formal signed agreements, appears to be practically over. This diplomatic paralysis stems from a fundamental and seemingly irreconcilable clash over international maritime law and security. The Islamic Republic of Iran is increasingly asserting its absolute sovereignty and physical control over the strategic Strait of Hormuz. Conversely, Donald Trump firmly countered this stance, demanding that the Iranian leadership officially declare in writing that this vital choke point is an international waterway, a concession Tehran flatly refuses to ever entertain in the near future, leaving the region in a tense standoff. Today, there was also a meeting in the, so to speak, White Room on how to deal with it. I think these confrontations between the U.S. and the Islamic Republic will continue, while they wait for some changes to take place within the Islamic Republic. But it seems like the Islamic Republic still has, so to speak, the capacity to endure, and still has the capacity to resist. As long as it has missiles and drones at its disposal, it can still react. That's also why you see that the attacks are currently all over southern Iran. They are all of them, the areas that the US says are the centers for launching and sending missiles. So there's no expectation that the Persian Gulf countries will act in unison, but fronts have been formed. The UAE, Bahrain, and to some extent Kuwait are ready to explicitly take practical action against the Islamic Republic. Some trips have also taken place among these three, but it's different for Qatar, Oman, and Saudi Arabia. Of course, Saudi Arabia has taken a very tough stance, and it's not unlikely that Saudi Arabia might also take practical action. This critical situation is driven directly by the Yemen conflict, as it increasingly appears that the Islamic Republic of Iran is attempting to block the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait, utilizing the local Houthi rebel forces to achieve this objective.
Thank you. Ali Sadrazadeh, Middle East analyst, joining us from Frankfurt. My colleague, Murad Vaisi, has also joined us from our Washington studio. Murad, we have spent considerable time discussing the broader regional developments, but looking inside Iran itself, Donald Trump specifically pointed out this critical domestic issue in a recent interview. Is it highly probable that Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and his diplomatic negotiating team really lack total control over the helm, and that powerful hardline and conservative factions within the Iranian government are actively working behind the scenes to ensure that this tentative diplomatic understanding and agreement fail completely?
That's exactly right, in my opinion. I mean, there is a deep division within the Islamic Republic, and rival power factions are competing with one another. And the issue of negotiating with the U.S. versus going to war with the U.S. is a real disagreement. But the root cause is that these power factions are using this issue to eliminate one another. In other words, negotiating with the U.S. or going to war with the U.S. isn't the main issue. The main issue is that after Khamenei, the balance of power among these factions has been disrupted. The dictator is dead, the hand controlling them has been removed, and the new leader is weak and absent. Consequently, these power factions want to reshape the power structure in their own favor, and it is only natural that they are now trying to eliminate one another to secure their dominance. The issue they're competing over right now and using to eliminate each other is whether overall we should go back to negotiations, because we won't get anywhere with conflict. Or no, they say we won't get anywhere with negotiations, we have to go fight. This has caused different factions in Tehran, different gangs, to tear each other apart. And another point is that these different power factions are generally factions within the IRGC, meaning this competition is mainly taking shape within the IRGC. For example, Bagher Ghalibaf is in favor of negotiations, while others might not be, because There is a strong belief among rival political factions that if Bagher Ghalibaf successfully steers the international negotiations to a favorable outcome, he will immediately leverage this victory to climb the ladder of power and systematically eliminate his competitors. This leads me to conclude that while these various factions are completely aligned against the Iranian people, meaning they will instantly band together to preserve the regime's survival, whenever a popular uprising threatens their rule, they remain deeply divided. When they finally have the chance to compete with one another, they do so aggressively. Consequently, the internal power struggle between these ruling elites is incredibly intense and serious. And the issue of negotiation or war is the fundamental issue right now. That's why today, Ghalibaf said both negotiation and defense. But Ali Reza Arafi in the seminary came out and said, no, we shouldn't negotiate. Ali Khamenei also came out and said, anyone who negotiates is a traitor. Then on the other hand, Hossein Marashi, the Secretary General of Iran, also came out and said, no, we might make a mistake like the hookah mistake driven by emotions during the Treaty of Turkmenchai that led to that disaster, and we shouldn't do this.
Thank you, my colleague Murad Vaisi from our Washington studio. The U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, has announced sanctions on 4 individuals and 3 entities connected to the IRGC's weapons procurement network. Meanwhile, Bloomberg reports that with the U.S. resuming its naval blockade of Iranian ports, 2 tankers carrying Iranian oil have changed course toward Pakistan. These tankers had left the Persian Gulf before the blockade resumed. At the same time, the U.S. Treasury Department has announced increased pressure and new sanctions against the oil sales and transport network linked to Mohammad Hossein Shamkhani, the son of Ali Shamkhani, the late advisor to the former leader of the Islamic Republic. The U.S. Treasury Department says this network is the Islamic Republic's main arm for exporting oil and generating revenue. Joining us from Washington is Miad Maleki, former head of the Office of Sanctions Targeting at the U.S. Treasury Department. Mr. Maleki, if this naval blockade continues in a full-scale manner once again, if international sanctions escalate to the point where the Islamic Republic is completely blocked from exporting its crude oil, how long do you think Tehran can realistically hold out economically before facing a total and devastating financial collapse?
Thank you for having me. Look, there are 2 aspects to this, meaning 2 sides of economic pressure that this naval blockade can actually create. One is imports and the other is exports. When it comes to exports, well, oil and petrochemicals, products derived from oil, that's the main part of it. That will take some time, especially the oil revenue, because, well, both during President Biden's term and also just a few weeks ago when there was no military blockade, Iran was able to successfully export a substantial volume of oil, drawing both from its onshore storage facilities located inside the country and from the fleet of offshore tankers it had previously filled to capacity. A massive portion of this inventory, valued at approximately $66 billion, is currently sitting abroad, floating in international waters. Consequently, it will take some time for any new blockade to actually manifest its full impact on their oil exports. However, what the Islamic Republic and the fragile Iranian economy will feel much more severely and immediately is the restriction on crucial imports. The most critical component of these incoming goods is actually refined gasoline, an essential resource that the Islamic Republic still must import. Furthermore, relying on imports from northern Iran is no longer a viable alternative, primarily because Russia is currently grappling with its own severe domestic gasoline shortages, which leaves absolutely no surplus for export. Consequently, in the immediate future, the overall impact of this aggressive military naval blockade will be experienced much more acutely on the import of vital goods and refined fuels, rather than on the country's outgoing exports of crude oil, refined petroleum products, and essential petrochemicals, which can temporarily rely on existing strategic stockpiles and distribution channels.
How much leeway does the U.S. military have to enforce sanctions against Iranian ships that exploit coastal routes before entering international waters? Is their hand truly free?
Look, you have made an exceptionally valid point there. I suspect they will indeed face that exact same challenging issue this time around as well. However, based on the insights I have recently gathered from the people I've spoken with, specifically my former colleagues and other industry professionals who deal with these maritime logistics issues daily and remain actively involved in the field, the outlook is slightly different now. What I have consistently heard is that several valuable lessons have finally been learned from those past complications, especially regarding the specific operational difficulties that arose during the previous naval blockade. blockade. Currently, international actors are actively seeking to preemptively address these loopholes by exerting strategic diplomatic pressure on Pakistan and other regional nations. The primary goal is to convince these foreign partners to restrict the Islamic Republic of Iran from utilizing Pakistani territorial waters to bypass the maritime restrictions. However, even if this targeted diplomatic maneuvering successfully closes off access to these Pakistani sea lanes, it represents only a very minor fraction of the total exports and imports that are vulnerable to this situation. Ultimately, such a localized restriction is relatively insignificant in the grand scheme of trade. Consequently, closing this specific waterway is unlikely to noticeably increase the overall economic pressure that the broader military blockade is already exerting on Iran's fragile economy. On a daily basis, approximately $435 million worth of crucial Iranian trade routes through the vital Strait of Hormuz. Unfortunately, the enforcement of this severe military blockade is guaranteed to completely halt and disrupt this immense global flow of commerce.
Thank you, Miyad Maleki, former director of the Office of Sanctions Targeting at the U.S. Department of the Treasury, joining us from Washington. According to Israeli media reports, the country's army will begin the process of withdrawing from 2 pilot zones in southern Lebanon in the coming days. These zones were established through U.S. mediation to assess the Lebanese army's capability to control the area, collect weapons, and undergo third-party verification. Meir Javedanfar, Israeli affairs analyst, joins us from Tel Aviv. Mr. Javedanfar, what will this mean in southern Lebanon? Don't you think it will help Hezbollah regain power?
Look, unfortunately, I must tell you that I am not very optimistic. While we all want the nation of Lebanon, the Lebanese government, and the state army to be strong, the reality is complex. We must not forget that the Lebanese parliament previously declared Hezbollah's armed wing illegal. Ideally, we want the Lebanese army to step in and assume full control over southern Lebanon instead of Hezbollah. But in order to achieve this, the state needs genuine political will, substantial international support, and the actual capability to enforce its sovereignty against heavily armed non-state actors. To reach this goal, they want to evacuate some specific strategic areas and, as you mentioned, have the official Lebanese army deploy there to start handing over control. This is essentially a trial to see if the Lebanese national forces can actually manage security and hold these territories. However, I am really not optimistic about this transition. Unfortunately, I say this because the sheer volume of weapons Hezbollah possesses is vastly superior. Hezbollah's massive military budget, heavily backed by foreign allies, has historically been far larger than the states, allowing them to acquire highly advanced weaponry, modern drone technology, and precision missiles that completely dwarf the limited conventional resources of the Lebanese army. Because Hezbollah is getting its weapons for free from the Velayat-e Faqih regime in Tehran. Meanwhile, the Lebanese government has to pay to buy weapons. So over these years, Hezbollah has been able to get a lot of weapons, a large amount of weapons from the regime, missiles. And at the same time, Hezbollah forces are willing to enter a civil war, even to protect their weapons and the areas under their control. So really, despite the fact that, yes, Israel is supposed to act based on the regulations of this agreement with the Lebanese government, currently, these armed factions must hand over control of these critical southern areas directly to the official Lebanese government and its national army, a process that is technically underway. However, a crucial question remains: will the Lebanese army ultimately prove capable and successful in maintaining long-term security, or will they fail? At the same time, we must not overlook the pervasive influence of the Velayat-e Faqih regime in Tehran. This regional power is actively attempting to exploit Lebanon, specifically leveraging the volatile southern border region as a strategic pawn and geopolitical leverage point against Israel and the United States. Yet we cannot ignore how the regime's self-serving policies have backfired, consistently causing severe instability instead of the regional security and dominance they originally envisioned. Instead of reclaiming southern Lebanon to pressure Israel, the Islamic Republic is now losing southern Iran. Repeated attacks by the U.S. military, including the Air Force and Navy, on docks and ports in southern Iran have caused devastating damage. Rather than successfully using Lebanon as leverage, Iran is suffering severe domestic losses. The extensive damage currently impacting southern Iran is so severe that it will take years to fully repair.
Thank you, Meir Javedanfar, Israeli affairs analyst, joining us from Tel Aviv. And thank you for watching tonight's 24 program. I know you're waiting to go and watch the Argentina versus England match, which is currently 0-0 in the 12th minute. Thank you for joining us. You can also watch this program again a bit later on Iran International's YouTube.